In the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church brought in all of the superstitions and fears and ancient terrors of the unconscious mind, the stage, the rising sea of the unconscious, the place where all things can happen and are repressed and kept apart by the subconscious from the conscious mind, the raging sea where everything can happen, where people will do and see and experience things they would never ever have in their conscious state. That's what dreams are made of, and nightmares. It's the creative source where things are pulled from, and they're rendered harmless once they reach the conscious stage. But to those who understand the forms of mind control, keep whole populations terrified, docile and obedient, and confused, the unconscious mind is a tremendous field of study. And those who brought religion into the world and Europe have all used these ancient techniques. And the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages have adorned all the ancient cathedrals with big, big money. And generations took to build up an ongoing plan which covered generations of stonemasons to build each cathedral. During plagues, famines, wars, and everything, this work kept going because it was a must-be by the real powers behind. And they adorned these cathedrals and all public offices with gargoyles. And the gargoyles were all of the ancient Middle Eastern terrors and fears which had been dreamed up thousands of years before. Why change something which works? You never throw away something which works. And these gargoyles took the place or the form of deformity. Our whole language is to do with forming. And they gave cripples, they gave us cripples who were stunted in growth, the dwarfs with horns, dwarfs with tails, like lizards, and that was the beginning of your reptilian types, until ultimately old Nick or Satan took on the form of part man, part beast, with the familiar horns, long tail, and claws, and so on. Something which was known to terrorize people, and had been used thousands of years prior to the Middle Ages. It had been used by the creators of even the Old Testament, which was written, remember, initially in the Greek language by priests who lived in Egypt. Study your history books. And they had the stories of Lilith, you see, and you'll find even the caricatures of Lilith with the same feet of eagle, and sometimes they would put a tail on her and wings, and a demonic type creature. This was used to very, very good effect in ancient Babylon, and statues can still be uncovered today. And all, of course, the amulets to protect against the Lilith character. So in the Middle Ages, they carried on the tradition in Europe and terrified the public who were illiterate, remember. An illiterate public who could not even read any holy book, and who had this theology dictated by priests in big churches and cathedrals, where it was all lit up inside. It was bright. Where outside there was forest and darkness and all the terrors of the night, which was your subconscious, unconscious mind. All the fears were left at the door. You walked past the gargoyles and these lizards and terrifying beings, and you were inside the place of refuge where nothing could touch you. How do we get to the Anunnaki today? one of the biggest Masonic, high Freemasonic writers, put out to initiate Masonic stories to the public, casting spells over the public, was Arthur C. Clarke, who did 2001 Space Odyssey and 2010 back in the 1960s. But he's lesser known for bringing out a book called Childhood's End back in 1956. And in this book, 1956, Childhood's End, the world's invaded by all these flying creatures that come just one morning. And man's worst nightmare has materialized by these flying reptilian creatures, you see, who force a human population into obedience, deciding that was the only way to create a utopia. Those who run the world often refer to their goal as the creation of a utopia for themselves. Arthur C. Clarke, in that book, prepared the way of the mind by preparing the soil for the idea of reptilians, taking over from the old Middle Age type Catholic Church. This was followed up by other authors who came out with their own particular take, and professors would call it spin, on decipherments of Sumerian tablets. Stating that the Anunnaki came and created two types of humans. One type was to rule over the lesser, the slaves. The type that was to rule over the slaves was to have more reptilian blood in them and genes in them. In other words, creating an order, you see. An order is something that's meant not to be broken because it binds the mind. And so this author came out with his particular spin, and mainly in the 90s. Prior to that, Enemy Mine had come out, a movie, in 85, where a spaceman crashes in some planet and is at war with another race of people. And who is the race of people? Well, they're reptilians. And so this lonely spaceman finds his main enemy that he fights all over the planet is a reptilian who's also crashed there. The reptilian has always, in a high esoteric understanding, been a symbol of the opposite of the good nature within each individual. If the kingdom of heaven is within you, then so is the kingdom of hell. And we can look around and we can always see which man and woman prefer to externalize. You have Enemy Mine coming out, followed up by a Mr. von Daniken, who in the 1970s came out with Chariots of the Gods. Chariots of the Gods. And all across the major newspapers in the world was this spiel, basically, on Mr. Daniken and how he'd found these ancient rock carvings in South America of these almost Indians riding these solar spacecraft like motorbikes and amongst the stars, and little guys with bubbles in their head like a spaceman, and all of this kind of stuff. And no one stopped to think, why would the major media be promoting this without question? When major books appear across the planet in major bookstores, the bookstores don't come looking for the book. It takes big, big bucks to promote any author out there into the mainstream. Permission is granted from above. And Mr. Daniken's books sold like hotcakes because they were fascinating. And little bits of old puzzles and old stories were rehashed and mixed in with the chariots of the gods. And has Earth been visited before by spacemen? And this went on for quite a few years. He sold lots of books and followed them up in rapid succession, as these authors tend to do with their teams of writers. And one day, it was exposed because one little journalist came out of Britain and went over to where he's supposed to have found these rock carvings. And he found a peasant who was paid a few pesos for each carving that he could carve out of rock. And Mr. Daniken fell from his chariot and hit the dust. But you can't keep a good lie down, you see. And it was revived, as I say, with other authors, and then Enemy Mine. And then a series broke out in 1984, actually came out in 83, called V. V is 5 in the Roman numerals. This is again part of the Masonic code, the fifth race they call it. Maybe one day I'll go into all of that. And V was a television series, big production for television, 19 episodes. And once again, the sky is full of spaceships one morning, and they're all over the world, and these quite beautiful creatures come out, very human looking. And it turns out underneath their little plastic skins, they're reptiles. Reptiles. I wonder where we get the idea of reptiles and why it keeps popping up, you see. And that's how the seed is planted. Through disinformation, through big, big muses. Muse. You muse an idea through fiction and repetition into the mind of the public. And that's how you build a pyramid in your mind. Prepare the soil, plant the seed, build on it, generation by generation. And the public will eventually be so bewildered, and they'll believe it, that you can spin them off in any direction. And the more fascinating it is, the more the people unfortunately like it.